And here we were all, once again, my parents, Peter and Gwen, and I, Kevin, with our regular addition to the room and keen listener of all things real side dream related, my sister Lindsay. For a wonder, the biscuit barrel had remained in its accustomed place, for all too easy it was for biscuit consuming to become habitual. What was possibly wrong with a biscuit? An outsider, puzzling over the banishment of the biscuit tin, might enquire. Were we, perhaps, deliberating over the harmful effects of genetically tinkered cookies? The emotionally overstimulating quality of chocolate bourbons? Or the distortions to our electromagnetic physical body vehicles that custard creams could exact? Well, in fact, we were just bored of them, and also by denying the presence of biscuits, we would assist in the shattering of the British stereotype, that of eating biscuits and drinking tea. The tea part certainly as a stereotype. The biscuits I wasn't so certain of. Maybe it was just boredom after all. Even the dogs would snub their snouts at a proffered biscuit. Well, possibly not. The passing around of doughnuts, however, would suggest that our anti-biscuit stance was not health-related, and so any suggestion of that was dispelled. And with everyone clutching a doughnut, Gwen sipping tea and letting the side down, it was time for more real side escapades, and capers of bravery, daring, and intrigue. I wouldn't mention the dream where I was running from that huge monster with 5 heads, as it would fail to meet the being brave criteria. My first dream would take us into the future, a potential future anyway, and due to the current mass cause and effect choices being made, currently a very likely future. I wouldn't be confined to experiencing this future through one set of eyes, not a bit of it. I was treated to a variety of roles and scenes. The individuals and I, in this setting, seem to be living in a very dystopian world, so a glimpse into the future, or quite possibly a dimensional version of the world we know, far more advanced, in a state of control and lockdown. The world here had a very mechanical theme to it. Everything automated, nothing organic in sight. Not even the hint of green foliage or the squeak of a rodent. All individuals, too, were robotized, ranging from slightly to extremely, but all were, to some degree, and very apparently so. As you might have gleaned, the robotisation was, of course, for the purposes of control, and not for the benefit of humanity, which I'm sure was the controllers' initial marketing ploy as they rolled it all out. But always, despite even the most severest of circumstances, the direst of locked-down grids and constriction, the lack of pork pies, always could be found the dissidents of the system, those that snubbed their noses at authority in all its forms, and rebelled against tyranny anywhere it reared its tyrannical head. So it is these bending of the prison bars, shaking of the shackles, rebellious orientated peoples I was in the role of. The dream was manic to say the least. Plots, subplots, storylines, all weaved together, all overlaying, and it was rather the task to pull apart the strands and place them into a linear sequence that could be recounted and made sense of. One feature of the dream was very noticeable. Every individual, nullified slave and rebel alike, had what seemed to be a mechanical attachment to their jaws, along with whatever other technology was merged with their bodies, and this was a constant. This was a standard means of control, and as the impressions flooded in, my awareness provided essential information that these jaw attachments could be made to explode. So, an effective means of control, and a deterrent for those considering bucking the system. For stepping beyond the imposed boundaries must surely be a fearful consideration, as the exploding attachment would disintegrate half the face or so, and render an individual dead. Some of the rebels had found a way around this jaw-dropping situation. They had managed to remove the attachment, but unfortunately, from a vanity perspective anyway, they looked rather gruesome, as they also had to remove the bottom portion of their skulls to achieve this. Naturally, then, it would be easy to identify someone who had done this, but to compensate for this glaring apparency, some of the wily dissidents had constructed fake jaws and attachments, and these they applied as they reconstructed their heads. Surveillance was formidable. Checkpoints were everywhere, so it was essential to be able to fool the system with replicas as close to resembling the real article as possible. The group I was with had been exposed, revealed as the authority defiers we were, our covers blown, and we were robots on the run. Well, half robots. Another unfortunate aspect of the genuine jaw attachments was that it contained a readable computer chip that was scanned at every checkpoint, and these were seemingly not as easy to replicate, and so we were ingeniously scheming, plotting, and endlessly bodging our way through the keen sensors of the checkpoints. It was imperative we avoid the scanning technologies as best as we were able, as they marked every individual who clumped down the streets. And should a scanner fail to read a chip, as an individual traipsed through a checkpoint, the alarms would bray, the military would mobilise, and that particular section be on lockdown. Flicking into the role of another individual and associated with another band, this time we were far more able, readily armed, and more aggressive in our anti-controller stance. With all kinds of tech at our disposal, we carried out all manner of missions and assassinations on key individuals, whose death would, it was believed, disrupt the system, impacting it adversely. For the good of the people, and in opposition of the tyranny of the oppressors. It was all very exhilarating stuff. So, it was basically a heads up, a possible future we are rushing headlong toward, or a dimension in which this is already a reality. Interesting was the focus on the jaw attachment that my attention was drawn to this detail. A suggestion, then, of it being essential to spread information pertaining to the real universes, the ears, and the real universal guides now, while there still is time, for not sharing what is real and offsetting through awareness the unconscious subconscious agreement to the world we see being rolled out will result in a world much akin to that depicted in this experience. For soon the day will come where the means to do so may be silenced, the computers and social media heavily regulated, any word spoken of it met with extreme indiscretion, to the extent that it would put off anyone even considering it. Effectively, everyone silenced, their jaws locked down, just as demonstrated in the dream, with the exploding jaw attachment. We also see how people, regardless of the severity of the control they experience, are constantly battling the system. And it is a system they have created through every individual's cause and effect agreement to it. Lindsay wanted clarity on this situation, an analogy that would go very nicely with her third donut. I pondered, and then delivered one. It was a little like throwing stones at the movie screen, but it was on the screen now, and a done deal. The agreement is what must be recognised and superseded through real awareness, not the attacking of the world everyone now was in, which only was there due to the agreement that manifested it. Too late now, but always through choice and cause and effect could circumstances alter again. It was all about becoming more aware, bypassing the cause and effect nature and programming of creation, and not getting embroiled in the emotion of the fight, the duality of creation. Or more cause and effect karma will we create for ourselves. Lindsay grinned. The robot folk were not speaking up, so their jaws were frozen. A nice, tidy summing up of the experience, it must be said. Lindsay asked about the robots and their robot-like culture in the future. Would they be delighting in the sipping of oil as a beverage? And if they sneezed too loudly, would cogs and springs fly out of their mechanical nasal passages? Naturally, I hadn't considered such things. The internal mechanisms of the robots hadn't occurred, or been revealed to me. I supposed it would depend on the extent of the robotization of the individual, as everyone was uniquely different in that regard. Lindsay then was about to embark on robot-orientated subject matter not suitable for the dinner table, and I had to raise a silencing hand. What robots did behind closed doors was their business. It was hard to imagine how that might work, if indeed it did, so maybe it wasn't necessary to close doors in this future after all. A very open-doored robotic society indeed, mayhap. Lindsay had popped open her infernal cell phone and was flicking through it, with the vacant-eyed, tongue-dangling, slack expression that generally accompanies cell phone interaction. I rolled my eyes, and with a sigh I inquired as to what had singularly managed to grasp her attention. Apparently, she felt the undeniable necessity to begin seeking Christmas presents, even though we were halfway through the year. I was about to launch into another dream, another of a robotic variety, but her Christmas purchasing had reminded me of an alternative, and perhaps one that might impress upon Lindsay the restricting nature of such religious ideas, and the taplining that follows agreement with them. I waited patiently until she had secured me a top, which depicted the grinning, jovial face of Santa. Unfortunately, it seemed they had run out of festive underpants that produced the Christmas Jingle Bells song every time one sat down. With the top secured, that I would never actually wear, but at least the dogs could look forward to a new chew toy to maul, I would proceed. In this dream, I found myself in the back garden of my house. I'd been in more exciting places, it must be said. Where were the monsters, the alien spaceships, the rampaging reptilians? I sighed and took in my surroundings. The personal little me always did relish the escapades of a more thrilling nature. Maybe I was about to be attacked by man-eating plants or something. My attention was diverted from my garden scrutiny for all things man-eating to the house, as there appeared to be individuals inside it. They were equally aware of me too, and were indeed beckoning that I join them. I approached curiously to ascertain what it was I was being invited unto. In closer proximity to the house, it became apparent it was the festive season. The house was festooned with lights. An overwhelming quantity of Christmas decorations, foodstuffs, and nauseating good cheer that this particular reptilian taplining event tended to encourage and cultivate. I refused to join them in their merry-making. Instead, I elected to remain where I was, and entertained and amused myself by flying around the garden, dipping, soaring, swooping, and diving like a bird. I looked beneath myself to see other individuals entering the garden below. And so I circled and spiralled downwards, landing neatly amongst the newcomers. I was glad to see these were not the people from the house, or others of a similarly festive nature, who had perhaps spilled from it and out into the garden. These were a new group. I recognised none of them, but became engaged in a very thought or awareness-provoking conversation about everything from harp to chemtrails to 5G, everything, in fact, that was real in the world, and not one mention of Santa, his sleigh, or his irritating, sycophantic collection of elves. I thus remained out here, with this collection of far more interesting, aware and awake individuals, conversing with them, and then new friend Val, Dean Val of the new universities, joined us in our discourse. I exchanged pleasantries with him, and we shook hands, the atypical human gesture of greetings. Lindsay was poised to order a pair of slippers that would produce another Christmas carol as an alternative to the Jingle Bells undergarments. As I now had her undivided attention, I would explain how the back garden of the house represented the subconscious, and it was conceivable that I was uprooting some deep embedded agreements from the past. Being in a garden, the phrase uprooting seemed especially applicable here. Some agreements may have been made centuries ago, and unless unveiled and the decision made to remove them, they will still affect and restrict us to this day. The dream suggested I was in the process of dissolving an agreement of a religious nature, in light of the Christmas theme that was prevalent in this experience. Lindsay pointed out that I wasn't in the slightest bit religious, that I was more likely to set fire to Santa's beard rather than write him a Christmas present wish list. I went on to explain further that human history has been accompanied by religion since the human species were originally created. So, at some point in the millions of years of incarnations, an individual would have invariably, at some stage in human history and lifetime, agreed to some religious idea or other. The agreement made, forgotten about, the restriction locked in, and still subconsciously anchoring individuals to the lower life levels resultingly. The occupants in the house were evidently trying to renew my agreement to religion through the Christmas idea, and ultimately then to control and restrict, even as I was in the process of removing it. I had the awareness to recognize this and refuse, seeing the marketing ploy, innocent as it may have seemed to the literalized masses, as the restricting ceremony it was, and instead chose to fly around the garden, demonstrating my liberation from this agreement and reaching greater heights, a greater recognition of the is through my real awareness that such an idea as religion would have obscured. And the final confirmation was when a group of more aware individuals arrived, and I was associating with them, being to being, with the final verification being the presence of Val. If I'd elected to join the house party, I would not have encountered Val and these more aware beings, as the restricted position and distraction it would have caused would have adversely affected my ability to perceive the life level these more aware people were operating on. I objectively viewed how people celebrate the personal self represented by the house. They were trying to get me to join them and agree to what they are agreeing to, but risk-takers are not interested. As long as we have 5 bodies, we will have to deal with the subconscious. We're not going to be able to deal with everything, but now we can be conscious of the effects that are taking place. So wherever we are, on whatever life level, we can now be the conscious effect, which is better than being the unconscious effect. So we know what to do and can eventually move along. Lindsay stuck her lip out. This I had often referred to as the Lindsay lip, which made its appearance under such circumstances where the disheartening revelation that something like Christmas may be denied by myself or others, thus diminishing the family celebration as a whole. To nullify the Lindsay lip and the disillusionment it represented, I accepted a pair of underpants, providing it lacked any theme or tune associated with Christmas. Clearly delighted with this compromise, she instead purchased a pair of underpants that made flatulent noises every time the wearer of said garment parked their posterior. The wit and humour of the human species never failed to impress and amaze, it would seem. With the Christmas dream told, and the predictable retorts from Lindsay, incorporating the phrase "bar humbug" and others of a similar nature, reserved for those who displayed dispassion for what the masses have been programmed and marketed as believing as the most wonderful time of the year, I would proceed. Lindsay's final comment on the matter of Christmas, and presumably one with which her defence for the merits of Christmas was closed, was that the dogs liked it. Hardly the final piece of damning evidence that would sway a jury and have all Christmas doubters raising their hands in acknowledgment of such an unchallengeable fact and acceptance of their misjudgments. It wasn't Christmas the dogs liked. It was the extra surplus of food that such a time of year generally yielded. But I let the matter rest. Time to return to the robotic dream I was going to recount before the Christmas one popped into my mind. It would begin in a sandy area, a desert setting, and I was not alone. Gwen, my mother, was at my side. Well, to be precise, she was to the side of me, in front of me, behind, and at various distances, as we were each equipped with some form of sand dune buggy. We raced and skidded over the soft, golden desert landscape, spraying plumes of sand from our rear wheels, having rather the merry time of it. We proceeded on. The sand began to diminish, and the ground became increasingly rockier beneath our wheels. The buggies were not so designed for such terrain, but we continued as far as we were able, until the rocks became so that further travelling by buggy was impossible. Too hazardous for our buggies, so we disembarked, shaking sand from ourselves and taking in the vista of our surroundings. What had caused us to have to abandon our vehicles was a rocky formation, but no ordinary mountain. It was immense, and as we studied it more closely, we determined it to be a jagged, petrified tree stump of gargantuan proportions. For yes, trees of truly monumental size once grew on the earth, and who knew where else? And when I say big, I'm talking miles tall. A lot were not only petrified on the earth now, but most were once cut down, and what remained are vast trunks that often are mistaken for mountains. The Devil's Tower in Wyoming springs to mind, that which featured in close encounters of the fourth kind. Most fascinating, if not somewhat disheartening, was what was at one time such a mighty grand tree that would have once dominated the skyline, a tree of unimaginable splendour, unprecedented proportions and age. How many cycles had it seen? How many suns and moons? In fact, we weren't entirely certain if this was the earth. We could be anywhere, and anywhen. A strange whirring sound reached our ears, and what homed into view, trundling a little unsteadily over the rocky formations, was a curious metallic creature. Due to its rather small stature, it didn't seem particularly threatening, but one shouldn't underestimate anything by size. Maybe it could fire mini torpedoes. We were in uncharted lands here, and who knew what laws of science held sway? But my awareness allowed me to glean that it held no hostility. Just a curious little robot then. Maybe it sought an oil change, or a new battery, judging by how its motions lacked smoothness and seemed very laboured. As we were puzzling over our new robotic companion, which had stopped beside us now, another individual emerged on the rocks and advanced upon us. We exchanged greetings, and this man explained how once this robot had been a living organic creature, and on inquiring how then this animal had met with such a metallic fate, we learned that many animals had been similarly robotized. The reason for this was that the scientists responsible wished to learn what various animals were thinking, as every thought is a unique frequency that can be converted into dialogue. So the robotization was necessary to allow a conversion from thought to speech via a vast compendium database of stored frequencies and their translation, all locked away in the robot's mechanical structure. Very ingenious, if not a little cruel. Animals turned into metallic versions just for the purposes of science. The original architects of this devilry were long gone, and their little robotic creations left abandoned, roaming this terrain unceasingly and without purpose. It transpired the individual joining us was not one of these original creators, and indeed proceeded to remove all the mechanical parts and return the robot to its former organic self. The animal, now restored, looked very much like a small fox, or a very close approximation. The fact that the metal of the robot was infused with the organic body of the fox would have made removing it difficult, and probably to the detriment of the animal, especially without laboratory equipment, and yet this man had done so with great effect and ease, and with his bare hands. This individual must have possessed creation manipulating capability, so quite possibly a guide. So it was a fascinating dream, a glimpse at other landscapes, boasting ancient petrified trees, long since destroyed, with robots clattering aimlessly about, their purpose and presence as mysterious as the long-past individuals who had created them. Were it not for the wisdom bestowed upon us by this guide, we would have never learned of the origins of these robots, and quite possibly then the guides are finding these unfortunate creatures and liberating them from their eternal metallic shells. Like any individual, regardless of the vehicle, be it a man or a fox, everyone is on their process, and so, if trapped forever in a robotic body, which these may well have been, then how can they proceed further onto better life positions, as they are doomed to remain locked as they are until set free? Lindsay was interested with the robot, and I would explain how it was an individual, demonstrated as one whose endless agreements have layered and compacted to where, yes, it became robotic, restricted, becoming frozen, as everyone can and does decide their life and circumstances through choices they make. And Gwen and I are sharing and presenting so are exploring all these realms, worlds and possibilities, and certain individuals will approach us, including animals, and they are curious. They may not always understand, as they may lack awareness. It's all in the doing, the activation, constantly and consciously doing something with life, not simply collecting knowledge. To do something creative is to be alive, like the sun shining, a real life, a real awareness. And like the sun shining, I have decided to make the real connection with the real light, and this is seen with the real awareness. And the approach is by the personal self, who is also looking to get through its own restrictions, which they don't consciously see, because it's hard to be objective about ourselves. And these experiences show us this objectiveness. Lindsay pondered over what other metal robot animals might be lurking in the far-flung corners of the cosmos. It certainly was something to consider, for robotization was something prevalent in creation, and humankind itself was poised to follow along this metallic road with how things were developing here. The discussion then arose as to if a real-life Darth Vader was at large in the universe. Then a debate ensued as to if Darth Vader was actually a robot, half-robot, or a man. I suppose the most important consideration was the creature's intent, rather than exactly what manner of creature it was. For if it wanted to cut you in half with a lightsaber, then that was pretty much all the information you required. And by the way, backtracking a little to what we were discussing with the dream to validate it, I pointed out Christmas is another idea that will have us tap-lined should we agree to it. I did mention it was a reptilian creation too, right? On mentioning this little-known factoid, Lindsay was less than convinced. From what I had divulged about the reptilians, she didn't think of them as a particularly fond species. So how then could they possibly be associated with the most wonderful time of the year, with all its twinkly lights, prezzies, good cheer, and Christmas carol singing undergarments? I'm sure the reptilians did have a relaxation time too, to kick back and discuss all the galaxies they had conquered, while sipping on some hearty human blood from goblets made of a human skull. But it was hard to imagine them being very jovial. The Christmas idea stemmed from religion, however, and in fact the theme had been hijacked from older religions, and tracing it back to the beginning, its roots were from the original Earth invaders. Like all religions, they had reptilian fingerprints all over them, for they created the humans as slaves, then kept them subservient and controlled through religion. Not all reptilians were bad, however, and indeed many were looking to the new presentation. Fed up were they of the conflict, and what with the Queen of Orion in the Phantom Zone, they didn't want to suffer the same fate. I had met many reptilians on the real side. Yes, I had got into skirmishes with them, and they had even once given me a sneaky poisoned pizza. But I held no ill will toward them. They were struggling individuals too. But even with this in mind, they weren't the most trustworthy species in the creational matrix. Not that Lindsay needed to have the point belaboured. If a reptilian told her it was snowing outside, she'd almost certainly have to go out and check. I had an experience to share regarding the reptilians that unfortunately wouldn't restore her faith in them. An experience because I wasn't actually asleep. I was dwelling in the place between wakefulness and sleep, a place I like to be, as it requires being in the nowness and connected to one's real awareness to maintain. An absence of thought and emotion being essential, and so a good awareness practice exercise, and all kinds of phenomena could manifest also from this position, which was always intriguing. On this occasion, I had the insight something was coming, something less than favourable, and so I reached out with my awareness to glean illumination as to the nature of it. Don't ask me how I know to do this. My real self always knows, and simply will do whatever is necessary. As much as I am able to, I keep the personal little confused and not knowing how to tie its shoelaces, or to trust to open an already opened can of soup self out of the way. The approaching menace was reptilian, but a variety of which I hadn't encountered before. Usually, as I was saying, the average reptilian isn't so bad, and even if they prove to be otherwise and bothersome, they are generally handled readily enough, with my connection to my real awareness or any situation incorporating the species, regardless of how intense these may become. But these seem to be a particular brand of reptilian, almost like the reptilian equivalent of the Secret Services, maybe skilled reptilian assassins. I could picture reptilians wearing James Bond suits, smoking expensive cigars, and deployed for special missions. My impressions kept on coming. Their objective was to kidnap not only myself, but my parents, Gwen, Peter, and even Lindsay. And who knew what fate awaited us in their hands? I felt it imperative that I begin singing the new U song immediately. I sensed the reptilians were near, and maybe on the verge of bursting into my very room, that perhaps only my real awareness would see, but perhaps not, and either way, it seemed they were intending to capture me, regardless of if I could perceive them or not. The New You song served to keep them at bay, preventing them from manifesting, much to their frustration, I'm sure, as though a barrier were exacted between them and I. Had I not had the awareness to sing the New You, the reptilians may have been picking my remains from their teeth with a toothpick by now. Continuing the singing of the New You song secured my safety, but there were other family members threatened, and so I kind of projected myself, separating my awareness. I was in my house again, but seemingly at a different time, as it was now night, and my parents were asleep in their bedroom. I passed through the walls, and attempted to warn them of the reptilians. Alas, they were only partially aware of my presence, so this method of relaying messages wasn't reliable, or was going to succeed. Still concerned as to their safety, I was suddenly in the living room. Gwen, Peter, and Lindsay were there, and my conveying of the warning was received. They each took heed of my words, and acted accordingly, successfully avoiding the reptilians. Evidently I was speaking with their real selves, and they assured me that their little selves were secure, and not being taken across the universe in reptilian spaceships. The reptilians had been denied, and had met with failure. So I would awake, and this reminded me once again of the challenge, the process of becoming more aware, littered with obstacles, reptilians, and those that would impede us, as we always endeavour to keep one step ahead of the controllers, evading their clutches and their want to destroy all those reaching for their real awareness. Again, it's all the process, the experiences, the adventures. We become more and more aware, and less the effect of being unaware. So through stepping up and having the adventures, the awareness is earned. Lindsay pointed out there must be easier ways to earn awareness that didn't involve battling reptilians across creation. Surely a simple game of poker or tiddlywinks would suffice. I grinned, just like the guides who face and do everything. This is what was required to glean awareness, and I was prepared to do just that. Tiddlywinks and poker, I'd upturn the tables, throw reptilian wine in the scaled faces of my opponents, and cause merry mayhem, all for the experience. Well, only if such was called for. I tended not to generally throw beverages in aliens' faces. it might be considered rude and cause a few intergalactic tensions. Most people sought and attached themselves to their comfort places, but eventually it would be the real you, and such comforts would no longer be required. So onwards and onwards unto the unknown. Lindsay remarked that wine thrown in faces might mean something different to certain alien races, cultures and customs. For all anyone knew, it could be a friendly gesture. I'm sure the reptilians thought it rather odd, as an example, how certain races of humans break plates as a custom, how flatulence was considered the height of amusement, why humans choose to wear tight-fitting nooses called ties around their necks when wanting to impress those in higher echelons of command, and why in recent times humans would take a perfectly good pair of pants and rip them, and this was then considered the height of fashion. That was a thought. If I threw wine in an alien's face, it might mean anything, from a declaration of war to a proposal of marriage, and judging by some of the aliens I had run across, I think I'd rather don the battle armour and march into intergalactic conflict. But that was that. The dream-telling concluded, from me at any rate, as there was more to come. Peter was gargling water as he prepared and eased his tonsils to relate now his dream experiences. It transpired he wasn't actually doing that at all. That was merely the way he usually drank his tea. Fair enough then. It was time for Peter to speak.
So what recent dreams have you had, Pops? Lindsay asked, with a sly grin on her face. Well, pins, I countered. I've had 3 that seem to involve travel, one after the other, though all on different nights. In the first one, I was driving my present car, apparently somewhere in Wales, or that was the impression I had. It was a narrow, undulating road in the countryside somewhere, with a beautiful backdrop of mountains. I have visited Wales 2 or 3 times and always found it a most beautiful country, but I didn't specifically recognise this part. There appeared to be several other cars with me, and we seemed to be some kind of a group as we hurtled along at great speed. In front of us was a man on a bicycle, not a motorbike, but a push bike, pedalling away, and always remarkably keeping in front of us despite our speed. I paused here. That it? Afraid so. So what did Dwayne say about it? I had previously discussed it with Kevin, and he said he thought the cyclist was probably Dwayne, which when I mentioned this to Dwayne he readily agreed. Apparently he rides a push bike all the time nowadays, no longer feeling the need for a car. He asked me whether I could see the other cars or their drivers. I told him I was too intent on watching the road to look, to which he replied, "That shows I was focused." He also said, although he had never visited Wales, he knew of it, and perhaps the meaning here was that I was having a whale of a time. Very funny. Moving quickly on, I then began to describe another dream I had had, also involving my present car. I was driving at night on a town road. I turned off into a country lane, which, though initially pitch black, was suddenly illuminated by an immensely bright light off to the right, such that I was totally dazzled and could not see the road ahead. I felt I knew the road to be very straight and would try and carry on until I got past the light. I ploughed on into the fog ahead. Next thing I knew, I saw a light ahead, not a dazzling one this time, but I found myself driving along a wide hospital corridor. There were people everywhere, none of whom seemed in the slightest bit fazed by seeing a car driving through their hospital. There the dream ended. Dwayne said that the right, where the dazzling light came from, always symbolised the future. It sounds very much like it was visiting hour, he quipped. Hospitals, he continued, symbolise people who need help, and he felt it meant I was in a position to help them. Presumably not by running them over, I thought, but thought better of mentioning. Dwayne then asked me what sort of car I have. I said it was a Volvo, to which he said, I always read a lot into names, but don't know where this one came from. Never missing a chance to expound on my seemingly endless wealth of totally useless information, I advised him that Volvo is apparently Latin for I roll, and was the name used when the company first started, I believe around 1915, and made ball bearings. Later on they diversified into cars, and the car company became so successful they went their own ways, the car company keeping the Volvo name. Dwayne thought it was appropriate for me to drive a Volvo, actually my fifth one, as it signified I was rolling along. Gwen must be too, she's on her third Volvo. Thinking about this afterwards, it suddenly struck me that I knew the ball bearing company after the split became SKF, or Skefco, as we knew it in Luton. Where I lived for the first 17 years of my life in Saxon Road, Luton, at the foot of the hill was one end and the main entrance of the Skefco factory. One of my long cherished childhood memories was seeing the huge blue illuminated SKF letters on the roof at night from the top of the hill where we lived. Oddly, when I first met Gwen and visited her home in Sundon Park, another part of Luton, I could not believe it when first going down their back garden and having a very similar view of the Sundon Park smaller factory, again with the familiar blue letters, though a bit smaller, on parade on the roof. Coincidence, Lindsay said. I do not believe in coincidences, I remarked. And what was the third exciting dream about? Lindsay inquired, not without a certain sarcasm in her voice. This time I was in, or rather on, a spaceship of some kind. It was circular, or the part of it I could see was. A curved, flat edge on which I and others, though I couldn't see them, were sitting, facing outwards, near the edge, wearing normal clothes, no spacesuit or anything. We seemed to be orbiting the Earth, and the spaceship seemed to be of earthly origin rather than alien. I noticed the edge in front of me was full of small parallel cracks about 2 inches long and 1 inch or so apart. As I watched, 1 or 2 pieces were working loose, and I kept grabbing them and pushing them back in place. One of them did escape, however, and floated off into space. That was it, really. Gosh, Dad, your dreams really are short and boring. Not at all like Kevin's long adventures. I was just about to respond to this when Lindsay then noticed the clock. Is it really that time already? I'd better get along. John's looking after baby Jack, and it's well past his bedtime. Jack's too, murmured Kevin sardonically. We all got up and followed Lindsay out to her car. Oh, said Lindsay, turning to me, what was the meaning of the cracked saucer? A disastrous tea event? Oh, Dwayne said it meant I had been trying to put pieces together. Basically old ideas of flying saucers and aliens, but there are new things on the way. Oh, said Lindsay, then turned and got into her car, a Ford. I wonder what Dwayne would have made of that.